episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow on many different fronts. Today is going to be a really fun show. I love convergent topics, and we are going to be diving into science, translational research, venture capital, business development, across a range of domains from pharma, cosmetics, material sciences. Really exciting stuff. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Anil Achyuta, who is an investment director and founding member at TDK Ventures, which is a deep tech corporate venture fund, part of the TDK Corporation, the Japanese multinational electronics company that's involved in a variety of areas, electronic materials, electronic components, and so forth. Anil is very passionate about both energy and the healthcare sectors, and ultimately believes that these are extremely impactful areas to build a sustainable future, a mission that he is leading at TDK Ventures. And he has, throughout the time there, reviewed over 1,000 startups, and then a list of some of what he has invested in to date, just to give you a scope here. Autoflight, which is an electric vehicle takeoff and landing company, Genetesis, magnetic imaging-based cardiodiagnostics company, Origin, 3D printing, mass manufacturing, EXO, which is a fascinating handheld 3D ultrasound imaging company, GenCell, which is involved in ammonia-to-energy hydrogen fuel cells, really fascinating spectrum of investment opportunities. From his 7 current investments, and he has already secured 2 exits. GenCell IPO'd on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Origin was acquired for $100 million recently. Anil has been voted as one of the rising stars in 2021 venture capital, and recently was ranked #2 out of 20,000 corporate venture capital managers globally. So a lot of exciting things. Prior to TDK Ventures, he's held multiple leadership roles in Fortune 500 companies, including L'Oreal, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline, and Draper. Anil has his PhD in chemical engineering from Northeastern University. He's authored over 15 peer-reviewed journals and has multiple patents to his name. Anil Achyuta, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks for inviting me, Ira. That was a long intro.
wanted to cover everything because it's a range of really cool topics, and I would love to start off like we typically do by handing you the floor for a couple minutes just to really talk about yourself, a little bit of your background, everything from where you grew up to how you got interested in chemical engineering and biomedical engineering, and sort of a little bit of your early interests, which are, combine everything from bioactive coatings for neural implants to working in the natural product segment as well. Talk a little bit about the early days, if you would.
Yeah, those are a lot of questions. I'm not sure if I remember all of it, but maybe it's a good test of how much attention I'm paying. I was born and raised in Bangalore, India, and so it's my home. And I grew up there, did my undergrad in chemical engineering, and really the interest in chemical engineering started from my interest in chemistry. My dad's a chemistry teacher, and he also teaches biology for some random reason, and picked up sort of love for chemistry early on, but really never started implementing anything in the real world until I started getting better at mathematics. And once I started bringing math and chemistry together, it really made a lot of sense that you could actually make products, and you can do research and so on, be useful to society. So in my undergraduate years, my uncle, who was the former vice president or senior vice president of R&D at Cargill in Minneapolis,
yep.
He had come down to Bangalore home, and then he was asking me about all these really tough questions about what do you want to do when you grow up, and why would anybody hire you? Questions like that. And it really opened my eyes and made me think that maybe I should take up graduate studies and learn more. So that's really was the turning point for me, that one conversation. And so I took up the GREs and so on. And I made my way to the United States. So humble backgrounds, dad's a teacher, so never had any money. So it was always fun growing up that way. And the first flight I ever took was from Bangalore to Chicago. So I had to learn about the flight etiquette, trial by fire, right? Yeah, I came to Northeastern, and my professor was very generous enough to hire me and give me a teaching assistantship. And very in short order, I showed him that I could teach, and was also interested in research, and got into research. And that's how the whole entrepreneurial bug started, because part of my PhD was funded by an SBIR grant.
Okay.
And I really, the first thing that they told me was, look, this is an MIT technology. Go to Ralph Landau building and go check out the reactor. And you got to take this and make it into a commercially viable thing. And then the startup wants to do that. And I was like, okay, first, who's going to bring the reactor to the office? That's how it started, right? Because it was this giant looking thing. We called her Nora, and the reactor. And anyway, long story short was that what I learned there was technology transfer is like such a hard thing to do, because it's very easy to write a paper. I mean, it's not very easy, but it's, one can write a paper by working hard, but going from that 95% product to that 99% was like industrially viable. I think that was the hardest piece. It took me about a year to really get the same reactions to work from the lab to the industry. And honestly, even then, it took, after that, it took them about 2 years to scale up and even get it right. So talk about deep tech, right? And these things are not as easy, only because there's a lot of trial and error. And I hope that it's changing because of the informatics and all of the data science work that's been happening. I believe that it's going to shrink over time. So that's me in a nutshell, just from a background perspective. But I'm happy to share more on my specific interests and how I landed up with bioactive coatings and things like that. And I think you'll see a little bit of pattern here, is that I was given a lot of chances by a lot of very generous people. And it's not that I had this unrelenting love towards A, B, or C. It just landed up that way. I think there were some basic building blocks that I liked. Like I said, initially I liked chemistry and math, and that gave me this foray into chemical engineering, because most people think that chemical engineers are chemists, and it's actually not true. Chemical engineers are actually far more like physicists, less mathematicians, but they're like physicists, but they use mathematics to get to that whatever outcome that they need in the thermodynamics or process engineering, etc. So that was the basic building block. And then when I started graduate school, I also realized that there were pure engineers, there were pure software people, there were pure biologists or pure material scientists. There were very few people who could do all of it. Or all of it reasonably well. So I was one of those guys. I was not exceptional, but I was mediocrely good at every small of these things that that mediocrity kind of turned into added value to many people because I could speak different languages. And that really helped me kind of be more like a system thinker. I didn't even know what system thinking was, to be honest. I was doing it and I learned that that was a thing. And also similarly with marketing as well. I'm pretty good at resonating with people, finding common points of interest, and so on. And I'm fairly extroverted in nature, so I get along with people much easier than some other folks do. And that helped me sort of build rapport with the customer pain and all of that. Again, I didn't know it was called empathic design or whatever they call it in marketing, right? And I was doing it, I just didn't know what it was. And I landed up in spaces where people gave me a chance to demonstrate that, okay, I can be a system thinker. I can think about the pain and then bring it back to the product and take it to the next level.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey you've been on along that front. And we chatted a little bit offline, and I guess the next place I'd like to go, before we get into TDK and all the really cool stuff you're doing now, one of the most interesting things about your background next is that you were involved, interesting, in a variety of, we'll call it more traditional industries, where people gave you a chance for some very non-traditional stuff. And when I say non-traditional, you were at GlaxoSmithKline, one of my former employers. You weren't doing drug development. You were in the electroceuticals and bioelectronics group. At J&J, you weren't making Band-Aids. You were doing neuromodulation stuff. And at L'Oreal, it wasn't about cosmetics. You were involved in deep tech, beauty technologies, really sort of, 10 years ahead of where these businesses are going. Talk about sort of what it was. I mean, you're sort of like the wandering venture capitalist inside these companies. Talk about sort of what was happening then, how, was it difficult to try to pioneer some of these futuristic ideas within sort of these 100-year-old companies that are pretty used to doing things one way?
Well, let's
take us on that.
Let's set the record right. I didn't make a huge impact in any of these companies.
Yeah, it looks like you did.
I'll be very frank, because I think they were very good leaders who are still working to make these companies even better.
Yeah.
I think I was a cog in that wheel, except that I did have some very memorable instances for working for Monsef, for example.
Yep.
Monsef was former head of R&D at GSK and also the head of Operation Warp Speed for COVID. Just learning from him, the dashing thinker, etc., was great. But let's dial back on your question. So I think I've always been a part dreamer, right? I like to dream up things, and then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And more often than not, it doesn't actually. and people were willing to give me a chance because I kind of gave them a more realistic view of what the world could be and what would happen if everything went right.
Yep.
The important thing that people forget is they're very smart and they think that by figuring out what could go wrong, or by figuring out by telling people how bad this could be, that they're better off. Right. But the problem is there's a market for optimists, and people don't realize that they have to not only do that, they also have to think about what's the best thing that could happen. And I think I was pretty good at that. And hence I got very good at grant writing, for example, at Draper Labs. It was the foundational thing that helped me kind of come out and really talk to people and tell them a story and really back that with the science and the market data in order to give me that chance. Because no one will give you a chance otherwise. You can't just talk your way through these things, especially with ideas, right? There's no product. You're just selling an idea.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. I think that the grant writing experience that Draper gave me into several of those DARPA projects, NIH projects, very academically oriented projects, really helped me understand how do you market to someone, and from there on, with GSK, they had already sold the idea to Monsef. So there was this guy called Chris Pham. He's still there at Galvani, the president. Yep. Chris, was an incredibly bright guy, and he was the one who sort of shepherded that whole initiative. I got in because you'd be surprised how I got into that group. It's such a small thing. Apparently, he wanted to build a network of research people in the neuromodulation bioelectronic medicine space. And for the right reasons, because he wanted to be ahead of the pack in peripheral nervous system neuromodulation, so visceral neuromodulation. And I think he asked some consultants, I don't want to name names, he asked one of these top tier consultants to come up with a list of people who were the best in the world or something like that. And apparently he had spent some time trying to do it, and he didn't have very good results. And he asked my boss, my former boss, Brian, who was his very good friend from Cambridge University. They both went to the university at the same time in England. And he asked my boss, and my boss said, hey, can you do this thing, find out who are the top researchers? And I'm like, oh, that's easy. And frankly, again, the entrepreneur self in me, right? I've always been that way. I guess, I don't know if you know the word jugaad. It means hustle in India, in Hindi. So it's just a little bit of a hustler, right? So I had asked my PhD advisor to keep a trial version part of Web of Science. So I've always kept that. I mean, I don't get it anymore, but just full disclosure. I was young enough, right? Just out of the lab at that time, a few years out. So I guess he kind of made me a favor. And so I was a consultant or something like that to him. Anyway, so I used that tool and mapped out the history of the research funding from NIH and DARPA from 1990 to 2012 or 13. Okay. And literally I plotted it on a timeline and picked out all of the researchers based on the publications, publication quality, H index. And it's something that any grad student would do, right? It was not something that was impossible or anything like that. It was a basic thing that I would do in a good critical literature search, right? You would be taught this in grad school, first thing to do, right? And I showed this work, and I made it look pretty and all, and Chris was bamboozled, and he was like, I gave this to this top tier consultant, and they couldn't do this, and you did this in like 2 days. I want to figure out how to put you in my team, and that's how I got into that initiative, and I think the rest was pretty much a great sort of journey, building a network of people actually doing that, and then starting the GSK Innovation Challenge, and starting about over 15 research projects during the time, of course, with the help of Arun and the bunch of other friends and so on. So my long story short is, people have given me a chance because I've done something that they need, that they couldn't do otherwise. And once you get in, then I think, it's about building relationships and understanding people's problems. And same thing happened with L'Oreal. I mean, I kept telling them that they should be looking into the future, which is into the medical side of skincare. So really thinking about where Allergan and the rest of the group plays. And again, there was already one person, my boss, Charbel, who was already doing that. He was, I mean, he has a PhD in regenerative medicine, okay, and the guy is as sharp as anyone else, and I met in that space, and he needed a little bit of extra help, and I'm you know he's still working on it. It's not that he's fully succeeded yet in that work, but I think we started something. I think we definitely started something, and including the CEO of L'Oreal, who's he's 25 plus years into this job, and he thinks it's all about medicinal chemistry, right? It's all about chemistry, and we're telling him no, it's about biology, right? And that is a tectonic shift for them. And on the other hand, there was already a guy, Guy Balouche, and again, I can't take any credit. Guy has done more to L'Oreal than anyone else in that beauty tech space. And my role was very, very small. My role was to look at the outside world and see which ones that we should be sort of going forward with, or what types of technologies would give us a leg up and further up. And again, very gladly so, I was able to impress a few of the executives at the business level, that they put me on a few M&A projects, and so on. And again, I'd never done an M&A before, ever in my life. I didn't even go close to it. And it's just, I just picked it up, and I spent, I think, over 100, 200 hours on learning about M&A and valuations from this professor on YouTube, actually, Ashwat Damodaran at NYU. And actually, he's maybe from Bangalore. Anyway, I picked up his valuations course, and I mean, he's such a great guy. I really learned a lot. Even I never went to NYU. I didn't even apply to NYU, but it felt like I went there. It was great. So again, a little bit of my story has been that a little bit of a sportsman's story. I grew up playing sports. I played competitive cricket. Similarly, I was good enough with mediocre players so that I got into the state team, but I wasn't really good. I was kind of mediocre. So, but what I learned from that was, this moment you get a chance, the smallest opening, you got to take it, and you got to go all in. And I've taken that from cricket, and I've been very fortunate and lucky that I've landed up in the right places. And obviously, TDK Ventures is it is my dream job. And I told this to someone recently. I could imagine myself doing this for the next 30 years and still be not bored. I would not use the word bored. That word, I'm only using it today because it just came out of my mouth. That doesn't exist.
Let's go there then, because I'm a child of the late 60s, early 70s, and obviously TDK was for as long as the cassette tape existed, and into the CD era. TDK was the brand. I never really thought about what it was, but TDK, here's the tapes. Talk a little bit. Obviously, the company's been around a long time. It was big then. Now it's involved in augmented reality and drones and robotics and all sorts of other really cool things. You're, running the corporate venture group. Talk a little bit about sort of how the company sort of reinvented itself over the years, and then also the role of corporate venture capital in sort of, once again, we're getting, when we think of corporate venture capital, we think of these projects. Okay, they're not the main business, but they're the future stuff that the direction we're moving. You're very excited about energy and healthcare. Talk a little bit about how corporate venture capital has played a role in TDK reinventing itself.
Well, look, I think we've only begun, right? It's a very small start. I feel it's the right start.
Small to $1 million.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I also want to say that number one is my boss, again, he was already pitching this for 6 months before I even joined. And I think it was already in the works for even 1 year before. So without him, I don't think there would be TDK Ventures. He is a visionary, and I think he's the best boss I've had, and you can put this on record. I've said that to him, and it's not like I've never said that. So I've said that, more than once. So I think that the key is he's got the right vision of why do we need corporate venture. I think that it's I don't know. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. I don't know if you know him. The power of why, right? Okay. He's majorly into that, and rightly so. So I think TDK is such an amazing company that it's really stayed current with the test of time. I mean, so many of these business units are just not even there. They're gone, right? The cassette tape, for example, the CDs, it's just that you were mentioning, and they have been the poster child of how a big company can be entrepreneurial.
Yep.
And they're Japanese. Japanese people are not known for this, and it's such a strange. It's an amazingly strange company where the concept of change is the only thing that's permanent. And our investment committee has 3 people: chief strategy officer, chief technology officer, and chief financial officer. All of them, they come from the era of the cassette. So if you ask them what can TDK not do, they will laugh at you because they just don't know they just don't have a filter. Right. So it's just quite amazing to work with people who are like me and think like me, and are real force multipliers. And the reason why TDK is so good at this is because they focus on contributing to the society. It's always number one for them. Very, very Zen Japanese types, right? And they think very long term. Okay. They have plans for the short term, but they think very long term, and they think about societal good at large. And when you did it that way, the short term losses will not feel like long term losses. I think many people make this mistake, right? They think short term gain is long term gain. They think short term losses is long term losses. Right. You just have to have the right perspective to understand what's a short term win, what's a long term win, and they really know how to do that. And for that, they have a very active R&D group. They have a very active investment group. Even before TDK Ventures existed, although they made only ad hoc investments, they never made investments like how we do. We can get to that, why we do what we do. And they have a very active M&A group. I mean, to take a look at the buy of ETL. I mean, lithium ion polymer battery, I mean, who cared 15 years ago, right? No one. I mean, Walkman, that was the only use case they had. Right? So they had no use cases, and that was taken away by our friends from Apple, right? So iPod came in and boom, it went away. So the thing is, well, I think maybe iPods also had lithium-ion batteries, but it was a niche market, right? But having the vision to say, okay, we want to buy this company, and today they generate over $5.5 billion in revenue, right? It's probably the best venture capital investment that they've made, right? So TDK is very well-rounded, and in from an investment perspective, The reason why TDK Ventures was started was because we needed to go back to what our founder did, which is exploration.
Okay.
We want, the analogy that my boss often gives, I'm going to give it here, is imagine, in corporate environment, what most people do really well is there's a mountain, there are multiple people, someone goes faster than the other guy, another person kind of pushes you, another person pulls you down, but somehow they get on the top, right? But what they don't do well is if there's a new hill and they have to go explore that hill and figure out if that's a mountain, right? So going and figuring out whether there are new peaks is something that corporates forget how to do. So it's a metaphor for incremental versus disruptive innovation, right? They do really good incremental stuff because they have to be focused. What they forget is there's this new thing out there. You got to be doing that because that's the only thing. I mean, take a look at the number of companies, top 10 companies in market cap in the last 10 years. The legacy industry, right? All the legacy folks are gone.
Yeah.
And the top 10 companies in the world today are all venture-backed companies. All of them. Literally all of them. You can go look this up. This is a staggering stat. And the point is that these venture-backed companies have gone and explored those hills, right? They were very small when they started. It was, Tesla Roadster was a hobby. It was not a business.
Yep.
So it started off very small. Apple started off very small, and so on, right? So they were all venture-backed companies. So, but they have grown into these amazing titans, if you want to call that. And TDK Ventures began with that exploration mission. When Nicola, my boss, said, look, we need to go back and invest in companies that will inform the future of TDK and be the helicopter where we have to go and explore these different spaces where we're not in today with technology we may or may not have. And that was the genesis. And I think with that mission, we are very, very confident that we will go in and make these investments where we will get both financial returns, strategic value, and do good to the world. We call it triple bottom line.
At the beginning, I went through some of your current portfolio and the deals that you've invested in, and obviously on the, we talked about handheld 3D ultrasounds and augmented reality contact lenses and so forth. Obviously, in those 1,000 or so business plans that you've looked at, there's been some trash probably, but a lot of other cool things you haven't invested in yet. What are some of the other areas that you're hot on, that you're really excited about, looking for? Obviously nothing confidential. And then say a couple, any funny words about when the business plan for something like Autoflight was put on your desk and they were like, here, Anil, check this out. And you're like, oh, vertical takeoff helicopters. I'm a biomedical guy, but take us on those stories as well, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think every entrepreneur goes through a journey, and it's their journey. So I know it's their blood, sweat, and tears. So I want to give the ultimate gravitas for their project, right? So we're entrepreneur first, and we care about it.
Yep.
Of course, there are lots of funny stories, right? You go through these business plans, and you're like, huh? What's that?
Right.
That once in a while that happens, maybe for the lack of our own vision, right, into the future. But look, I think the key is, when we look at opportunities, we often try to find these opportunities that are small today, but will be massive tomorrow. Yeah. The underlying notion here is that triple bottom line. it has to be in a market that's exploding, right? It can't be in an area that is much slower in pace, because it has to look venture-like, right? A venture-like business would look something like 5, 20, 80, right? Revenue, that's how it should look like. Now, people have figured that out, and everyone shows that, right? So it's up to us to somehow decipher that and decode that into reality, right? Because in the history of venture, there might be maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 companies that have done that. Not every company will do it. So there's a little bit of that, right? So we often chuckle about it, the hockey stick revenue. Maybe one I'll share you one funny story about.
Sure.
I won't name names, but funny story was one of my friends apparently his boss is a pretty smart guy, and he basically said, "Here are the projections. I can do Excel." To the investors, and the investors was like, "Okay, next slide." So at the seed stage, I think those would be pretty true, right? Everyone's kind of like, "Okay, cool." But I think it gets serious once you start hitting A's and B's and C's. Things start becoming much more interesting. The second part, I think, of the question that you asked about was interesting areas. I'm generally very optimistic about energy storage. That's one space that I feel is just changing everything that we do. I mean, I don't mean that lightly at all, right? Electrification in general is driving everything. I mean, mammoth industries are being converted. Oil and gas companies are no longer calling themselves oil and gas. Have you noticed? They all call themselves energy companies.
Yep.
And so I mean, I have nothing against hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are perfectly fine, right? It's just that they're going to go away. So do you want to get on the new ship, or do you want to kind of keep messing around with the old guy, right? So I think the electrification, energy storage, hydrogen feels very, very exciting. On the healthcare side, I'm super thrilled about point of care diagnostics. I think it's just, COVID has just changed the landscape, right? Sure. Someone asked me recently, "Anil, there's all this telehealth stuff that's going on. Where's the innovation?" I said, "There's no innovation. It's just been the same. COVID has changed everything, right?" Yeah. People have to do it. It's just like, you can't just show up to a doctor if you have a cold or a cough. It's going to change. Or a fever or whatever it is, right? It's going to change, and integrated medical services is going to become a thing. Same thing with fertility. Same thing with various markets, right? So I believe that the diagnostics, life science tools are going to become like a mundane consumer product. It's going to be like, "Oh, I'm going to buy a Keurig. I'm going to buy a PCR or whatever," right? It's going to be like that in the future. So we're going to have massive consumerization of medical products. Some are good, some are, you have to be careful on the data privacy and things like that. But I'm hoping that it's going to be for the better. And specifically thinking about medical education, access to imaging, access to the right, testing and so on. I mean, look at India, for example, how much they're struggling right now. It's really disheartening to see what's happening. I only wish that they had more tests and they were much more stringent, and the wave could have been picked up before it started. So long story short is, I'm very, very excited about point of care diagnostics, life science tools, on the medtech side. And on the energy side, energy storage, hydrogen, electrification, and on the materials side, I definitely think circular economy is going to be a huge deal, because people are figuring out business models. People from and honestly, I think talent also is changing, right? The younger people, the younger folks are getting into legacy industries, and frankly, in my generation, that didn't happen. Why? Because you get paid more. Facebook pays you, I don't know, crazy amounts of money, right? $500,000, something like that. When you see salary packages, these are quite rich, right? Facebook and Amazon and all these software companies, they pay you really well. Now, I think the next generation is looking at the world and saying, there's a lot of things that are wrong here. Let's get into these legacy industries and try to either digitize it or make it less, more carbon neutral, less effect on one planet that we have here, and so on. I think that is very exciting to me. Just the people part, and I think we have to do everything to encourage the younger generation and kids to get into science, and really make that impact, because there's tremendous movement, and we can't lose now.
I wanted to go there next because I usually get contacted after I know I'm going to get contacted after this one, from that next generation, the senior that's headed off to college in a couple months, the freshman in college. They want to follow your footsteps. They want to be the next Anil Achyuta. What do you talk? What do you talk to that generation about? They want to be you. What should their plan be after listening to this and heading off to college?
I don't know. I mean, that's such a huge burden on me. That question is quite loaded.
Yeah.
I think I would tell people, again, I'm biased. I would tell younger children to play sports. It's the first thing I do. Because what you learn from sports is you learn how to lose. That's a very important skill to have. Absolutely. That probably is the best skill to have than anything else. You can solve Cauchy-Riemann equation, but if you don't learn how to lose, you're going to lead a very, very unhappy life. And because most of your life you'll lose. Very few times you'll win. If you keep winning, then you'll not understand the value of winning. It's like, everything comes handed, right? You got to earn that respect. So I think that's probably the biggest point that I'll make is, I think sports is one way, right? Do something competitive. That would be my, maybe I should be a little broader, right? Maybe a competitive music, competitive, whatever that is, right? Art, sports, or activity wise. Doing something competitive will really get you to understand how do you lose gracefully. Graceful loss is not about shaking hands. That's one thing that I have to, sort of make people understand. Graceful loss is about shaking hands, coming the next day harder, 10 times, right? And having that competitive spirit to really understand what went wrong, how can you do that better tomorrow, and trying to better yourself. And I think in individual sports like tennis and such, people talk about it. You are competing against yourself and things like that. I think those are types of things that one would want to develop when they're young. Mm-hmm. Now, that I think is probably the best advice for I would say 5-year-olds to 16-year-olds, right? Because once you pass 16, I would think that you're old enough to, or I fear that you may have already gotten into certain habits that are difficult to break. But obviously, everybody gets a second chance. Everybody gets to sort of iterate their own best self. Um, so I would say from 16 to 25, I would advise them to probably from again career point of view, I would advise them to explore a lot of different things. So try to work in a restaurant, try to work in various businesses, and try to work in labs. I think you learn a lot of discipline from working in labs. Try to basically trying different fields is good. And maybe 25 to 35. I think respect your elders, right? That's another thing. Is something that I would say, and it really pays. Because not because oh, you didn't respect anyone before. It pays because you'll now start managing people who are probably slightly older, and you have to learn how to work with people, and you're at a different layer and level, and you have to somehow modulate what people expect. How do you deal with different people, and how do you get the best out of everyone, right? Because people have kids and they have their lives, so usually you'll get less of them from a time point of view, but you have to get the best out of them. How do you do that? I haven't figured it out, just FYI. I'm still kind of working that, right? How do you get best out of people? I still, I'm not sure. I think I take a lot more time. I think I could be better there. Yeah, so that would be my advice to different parts of the generation. And 35 up, I think live your life, right? Have a good time. Don't regret anything. I think looking forward is tomorrow is not here. Yesterday is gone, right? Today is the only reality. So just live it up a little bit.
Great messages. Anil, one final question while I have you. A couple days ago on the show, I had a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense on who, prior to her days now thinking about autonomous drones and artificial intelligence and things like that, got her PhD in natural products pharmaceutical chemistry, which she longs to get back to. Just looping back around to your beginning now, do you have, when you're not thinking about all this other stuff, do you have any interest ever in going back into the natural products world where you sort of started out? Because natural products is a fascinating area that I personally love and think we still have a lot to learn from the natural world. Any couple thoughts on that whole domain?
Yeah, look, I didn't start out in that world. I was more morphed into it. I got into it. And frankly, I'm not the right guy to ask this question because I'm all about synthetic products, or I would say I like biomaterials. That's one of my favorite places because there was materials and there was biology, and like I said before, people who knew biology didn't know materials, and people who knew materials didn't know biology, and I kind of was mediocre enough or mediocrely good enough to be in both. Anyway, I'm not answering your question. What advice do I have, or whether I have any passion towards that space? I do. I mean, I even advised someone yesterday.
Okay.
As recent as yesterday, this person has this new technology in hyperspectral imaging, and they were looking at skin reflectivity and trying to figure out ways to actively monitor skin conditions and provide recommendations for personalized recommendations and so on. So it was last night actually. So I would say I'm still interested. I still think there's a ton of work to do, and consumers are getting incredibly sensitive about, for the right reasons, about the environment, because it's not just, what's in the product anymore. Right? It's not just that. It's how the product is sourced. Where are you getting that from? Right? If you're getting cocoa butter from somewhere, right? Or are you farming it in the right way? Are you getting this in the ethical source? Are you transporting it? How much CO2 are you burning by transporting this thing, right? Or do you have some strange labor around, right? What are your practices? 2, how do you package this thing? How do you put it in a recyclable thing? Or is it biodegradable, right? Even the products are coming in biodegradable containers now. So packaging, to making, of course, the chemistry and the business end of the product, right? That you have to engineer that also to make it green, sort of very, very safe, and when it goes down the drain of your showers, etc., it shouldn't kill the aquatic life, right? Or whatever it is. So there's end-to-end upstream to downstream implications, and how you advertise. Are you inclusive? Are you being are you helping people, or are you just making them more sick, right? So there's so much responsibility that world has, that everybody needs to raise the bar. I have to say, L'Oreal was doing a fantastic job in doing this. They were really, even with models and things like that, they were really up, at the forefront of this green revolution. I knew a few fellows who are working on some really cutting edge green chemistry to make these products completely safe and fully biodegradable and efficacious, because that's the biggest problem, right? As someone says, what's the difference between a drug and poison? It's the dose, right? So things that really work are actually toxic. So balancing those with the environment, it's a responsibility that we have as today's generation to help the next generation to reduce the footprint. So I'm stoked about that space. And it's just that I have very little sort of time to balance everything that's happening with the board responsibilities, with looking at new spaces and returning financial returns for the fund, because ultimately we are a fund and we have to return capital and add strategic value to TDK and so on. So that takes up pretty much most of my time. And I try to keep some time open for my family and my son. So that is another thing. So I'm still figuring that one out, how to balance.
We all are.
I'm not sure if I have, but I hope that I get better.
I'm sure you're doing quite fine. This has been a really great time, and I take my hat off to you with all you're doing, and really wishing you the next 30 years to keep on this path and keep doing these amazing things that you're doing. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode on our podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Anil Achyuta, investment director, founding member of TDK Ventures. Anil, once again, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while. Thank you for everything you're doing on the energy front, on the healthcare front, and as we say on our show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. Really inspiring stuff.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real honor, and I hope one person can gain some benefit out of this, and that would be, I would have had a job done.
I've already benefited.
Well, you made my day then.
Be well.